Mats Persson from Sweden is director of Open Europe, a think tank which advocates reform of, but not withdrawal from, the European Union. I asked Mr. Persson if he thought that the UKIP surge here was unique or part of a wider pan-European phenomenon.
I think it's very much a pan-European phenomenon. We see, if not similar parties in terms of ideological disposition, we certainly see a lot of protest parties cropping up all across Europe, spanning the left-right political spectrum. And very likely, these European elections will see quite a few of them doing really well. They might win in places like Denmark. The Danes have a quite clear anti-immigration party, sort of populist party on the rise. In France, of course, Front National is expected to do really well. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders might not do particularly well after all, but he's definitely a presence.
What are these parties all protesting against? Are they protesting against Europe, are they? Or
Well, Europe is definitely part of it.
something else? I mean, I suppose the question really is, are they all protesting against different local priorities and things, or is there a sort of common movement?
Well, I think the common movement is a general discontent with both the status quo in national politics, but also I think Europe plays a part in this as well. So I think there is a quite cynical political environment out there with a lot of people simply not trusting politicians anymore.
Are they going to change anything? I mean, the reports I've read suggest that there'll be a large increase, a significant increase in right-wing parties in the European Parliament. But actually, the regime, President Barroso, carries on and, nothing's changed.
Well, this is the paradox. And for me, it's also quite a bit of a sad irony that even though you will have a quite strong anti-EU showing, the most likely outcome from the European elections may actually be that the next European Parliament becomes even more integrationist, pursues even more centralizing policies. Why? Because the two main political blocs in the European Parliament, the socialists and the centre-right bloc, the EPP, already vote the same way 2/3 of the time. And that incentive will be strengthened with a big anti-EU contingent, because those two main blocs, mainstream blocs, will want to freeze out who they see as extreme anti-EU parties. So the result may actually be that the reformers, the critical reformers in the middle, those which I would think that a lot of Brits would sympathize with, they will be crowded out, and we will get a polarized parliament which offers either no Europe or more Europe.
And that's very interesting indeed, isn't it, for David Cameron, if he wins the election and has his referendum and goes to Europe demanding reforms and powers back to Britain, he'll find it very hard to get through the European Parliament, from what you're saying.
One of the great untold stories in the whole Europe debate over the last few years is just how much powers the European Parliament has gained. I would expect, or we estimate, that perhaps half of the ideas that Cameron wants to pursue ahead of that potential 2017 referendum, about half of the policies that he wants to put in place, probably will in part be decided by the European Parliament. In other words, the European Parliament will have a veto over half of Cameron's EU renegotiation package, and that's critical.
Give me an example of a sort of red line issue which Cameron has to get in order to recommend yes in the referendum, which is likely to be vetoed or come a cropper in the European Parliament.
Well, I cannot say if it's likely to be vetoed or not, but I think the flagship issue is probably this idea that Cameron has to rewrite the rules on access to benefits for EU migrants. He has put it very clearly that he wants to see tighter rules for those coming here from the rest of the European Union, and that I think is going to be possibly his top item when he renegotiates, and that will be decided in part by European Parliament. If a majority of MEPs don't agree with him, then that reform cannot happen.
Final question, very briefly. These elections, are they going to change anything?
My hope is that, as someone who very much wants kind of a middle way between no Europe and more Europe, my hope is that the elections will will sort of serve as a wake-up call for the political establishment that if reforms are absent, if we do not decentralize Europe and have an EU that does a lot less but does a lot better, then the alternative will be anti-EU parties, anti-immigration parties, populist parties that want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I hope politicians across the continent will see the election result as a start of a sweeping reform drive of the European Union.
That was Mats Persson with the paradoxical message that the rise of UKIP might make European reform less likely.